In this captivating interview with Sheldon, the brilliant CEO of Darwin AI, we take a deep dive into the world of artificial intelligence and its impact on society today. With a diverse background in philosophy, ethics, and technology, we follow Sheldon on his remarkable journey to the helm of Darwin AI. We're going to cover his leadership style, his thoughts on AI development, as well as provide some practical advice for people navigating these uncertain times. So join me through this exploration and gain some valuable insights from a true tech visionary. Welcome to Articulate This. Let's get into it. Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode at Articulate This. This week we have Sheldon Fernandez, the CEO of Darwin AI, who's also an accomplished author and speaker. Welcome, Sheldon.
Thanks, Pat. Good to have me. Good to have me. Good to have you. Good to have me. Thanks for having me. Let's start there.
Awesome. We'll just get into a couple of questions here. The show, we focus on the people behind the technology and try to get more, get to know them and what they're doing these days. So can you tell me more about the journey that you had from studying computer engineering to pursuing degrees in theology, philosophy, and creative writing? This very diverse, unique background.
Yeah. So let me begin. First of all, I went to St. Elizabeth Catholic High School, which I think our host went to as well. That's how we knew each other. Then I went to Waterloo. I did a undergraduate degree in computer engineering. And Waterloo, like many Canadian universities, it's a very specialized program, right? So you're really not getting a lot of exposure to humanities and things outside engineering. So when I graduated, I started a software enterprise consulting company with some classmates, but I felt there was another part of my mind that wasn't being used or hadn't got exposure to the humanities. So I started a part-time theology degree. I forget when it was. It might have been 2002, 2003, at the University of Toronto, Regis College, which is a Jesuit institution. Did that, for a few years and completed my thesis in 2008, which we can talk about. But then, also had a bit of a humanitarian, literary bent to me. So I did creative writing at Oxford. I did a program there in the summer of 2008. And I spent some time doing humanitarian work in Kenya. And, kind of been an interesting intersection of experience as a result, yeah.
The reason why I wanted to go through this is because I really think of, it's interesting as your path is where you are today and how it's kind of shaped you. So how do you think your background in philosophy and ethics has shaped your approach to AI development, its impact on society? Because now I learned about ethical AI through you back, 2018, 2019 when you started posting about it. So how do you think that background kind of helped land where you are today?
Yeah, great question. So studying theology and philosophy, right? What are you doing effectively? Like, what I was doing was learning what the great minds of human history had taught us about right and wrong and the systematic way that they went about answering those questions. And so the frameworks that I learned about and wrote about and studied and analyzed, of course that had influence on how I think about artificial intelligence, its implementation, the moral compass I try to bring to our organization. So it definitely had an influence. I would say an indirect influence, right? So, there's directly influencing in terms of engineering and my education. That gave me the technical expertise to go into this field. The ethical stuff was, almost tangential. It was interesting, and it does influence how I bring moral questions to these very powerful technologies, which of course now, and I'm sure we'll talk about this with ChatGPT and the like, it's so ubiquitous that the ethical questions around it are very acute for anybody who is paying attention to this stuff. Yeah.
That's actually a good segue, because I was going to ask you about, in the past, week and a half, Geoffrey Hinton, who's known as the Godfather of AI, the not-for-profit Future of Life Institute, backed by Elon Musk, after ChatGPT with their latest version, I think it's version 4, are like, there's concern or alarm at the speed of which this is coming out. Do you share those sort of same ideas?
Yeah, I'm alarmed by how quickly this is happening, right? So if you had talked to me a year ago and told me when we would see AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is basically whereby a machine can do any task because it has a general intelligence that it can apply to math problems and chemistry and building blocks, I would have told you that would have happened in 2035 or 2050. Wow. Given what we're seeing with ChatGPT and how fast this is happening, I don't know, Pat. It could happen in 2026, or 2025. This is the rate of change you are seeing. And so I think these leaders in our space, they're right to be alarmed with how quick it's happening, and the fact that we're not equipped yet as an industry, as a species even, to deal with how quickly these things are evolving. So I agree with Geoffrey Hinton and Elon Musk's alarm around this. I think for me is I don't know what we do about it. Yeah. Because, and I say this as somebody who, started and runs an AI company. We exist, at least in this part of the world, in a capitalistic context where you have to be innovating and you have to stay ahead of your competitors. So how do you put the brakes on this transformative technology when the purpose of most of these organizations, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, is to make money for their shareholders? How do you pause? And even if you agree to pause in this part of the world, are we confident that China will pause, that Russia will pause, that Israel and every other country that has their own national interest will pause? So I'm cynical about our ability to contain this because of human nature, but I share their alarm at how quickly this is all happening.
Have you seen anything out there? Because I did research on frameworks on how to go about this. I know Microsoft has its responsible AI. The White House has developed an AI Bill of Rights. The EU Artificial Intelligence Act. There's a whole bunch of these things that are coming. Have you seen any of these that you think, well, yeah, they seem to be on the right track, or are you excited about any of these, or concerned, or?
Not really, because what's the effect of these things? Okay, so, the White House comes out with a bunch of recommendations. What legislative effect does that really have on the researcher who's going to try things? Sure. Right? And here's the problem, legislation moves so much slower than the technology. Right? So by the time they're still trying to legislate for second wave machine learning, which our company and most companies were doing in 2020. Canada's still trying to wrap their head around data privacy and these questions, some of which are applicable to this latest stuff, but many of which are not. So, you read about it, and then you're like, okay, take Microsoft, for example. I'd have to verify this, but I believe it's true. They gutted most of their ethical AI team. So you can put out all the PR you want, but are you really doing it in a responsible way? So I see these things, and they're good conceptual ways to think about AI development. What's the real force that it has on anything, right? Unless you're really going to codify it into law and put real guardrails around it, it's just words on paper. And I guess maybe the EU is taking, and they're usually good at this, taking an advanced, aggressive stance on this. But even with them, I don't, there's thorny questions. Okay, fine, Italy, you might have seen in the past month banned ChatGPT. Yeah. I think they've reversed it since, if I understand it, or done a caveat to that. It sounds good, but now you're basically preventing all your companies in Italy from using ChatGPT for software development, for research, for writing. what does that do to their ability to compete on the world stage, right? So I'm just, maybe this is the elderly cynic in me. I just wonder about how effective these things can really be.
Where we are today, do you have any ideas or thinking of how we could potentially get ahead of this, or what could we do? Has it gone too fast, too far?
Oh, man. I don't know what we could do, because it just, how do you stop people from innovating, right? You look, I mean, I'm surrounded by, in my company and in our industry, people, scientists that want to push the envelope because they want to see if it can be done. And it's not nefarious, right? People don't do this to destroy the world. They do it because they're curious. At least scientists do. Academics do, to see, hey, can we chain these together and make them work faster and so forth. I don't know how you prevent that impulse in our species, right? Without a massive state intervention that, can stifle innovation. But some people have suggested, like, some real Silicon Valley leaders have suggested, look, before you put these things out in the wild, they need to be in a sandbox first, and we need to test them and see them and monitor them, which probably merits exploration. I just really wonder about our ability to do that.
How do you apply your leadership in this arena with this innovative technology?
I don't think it differs fundamentally from how you run a good business, right? So you speak honestly with your clients about the powers of this technology, the risks, the benefits. I have a leadership style where I lead very much by empathy and vulnerability, as strange as that may seem. I'm completely comfortable telling my team when I don't know the answer, but this is what I think the answer is, and there are risks associated with it, and transparency. And I think we try to do the same thing with our clients. Like try to deliver excellence to them through our commitment to, being a good steward in our domain. Trying to get them excited about innovation. So there's so much excitement and interest around AI, right? I mean, it's gotten to a point where some of the very senior people I deal with at these organizations, they now are asking about AI because their kids are asking about it, because their spouses are asking about it. So we're trying to take advantage of that, cachet that exists around artificial intelligence right now to our benefit, and we can because we're a legitimate AI company. But I think the fundamentals of business, Pat, and what makes a business successful in the long run, right, which is respect for your employees, respect for your customers, the commitment to excellence, those are tenets which I haven't changed, certainly, and which I don't think will change in this new world that we're about to enter. Maybe more so people are looking for the human touch because so many things are artificial now, right?
Yeah.
So I think I think that's the way I think about it.
So how has, going into the manufacturing world, I would imagine there's some that are like all about innovation, want to try, but how receptive were they to this new technology and how it meant to their business? Like how, when you first started, I would imagine you probably would have had some people that were very interested in it, others were very reluctant. So how did you navigate that? How did you...
Yeah, it's a good question. So again, we grew up as an AI company, and the original iteration at Darwin was kind of selling to data scientists and other AI people. We basically had to change, and we wouldn't speak technology to manufacturers. We would mostly speak language that they were familiar with in a business context, right? So, efficiency rates, failure escapes, scrap, rework, that type of thing. And so you need to be able to speak their language and show the benefits of your technology and your offering in a way that makes sense to them, right? If you don't do that, you're just saying words that sound impressive but don't mean anything to them, right? So that was a big transformation we had to go through. We had to get over the fact that they didn't care about neural networks and backpropagation and transparency and AI and all these things. They wanted to learn, okay, I get you guys are using AI. I don't understand it, but how will it benefit my business, Sheldon? Tell me bottom line. And we had to really develop an expertise around that.
How easy was it to get data to support that? If you're trying to develop an MVP or proof of concept for your clients, how easy or difficult was it to get that information?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. You had to do a lot of work. We got public data sets, and we actually recently, I wrote a Forbes article about this. We're using generative AI, which is the new form of AI that ChatGPT is based on. We use that to generate synthetic data for our use case, right? So now what people are doing is, okay, it's hard to get data, and you need data to train AI. Got it. We can also generate, artificial data using artificial intelligence. So we've been able to be innovative in that realm to our benefit.
Like, how do you have data to show how much you've reduced waste footprint and things like that by using this technology?
Yeah, so we can point to case studies where, when they've implemented our system for 3 months, we were able to detect, this amount of things quicker. We eliminated rework by this much. We increased throughput by this much. Obviously, it's customer specific, and I can't share specifics for each customer under NDA. But we've been able to document case studies where we've been able to show efficiency gains with our tech. Yeah.
So, I'm not sure if I understand this correctly, but you still have a pure academic team that's set up within Darwin AI. Is that accurate?
We have researchers. I hesitate to call it research now because it's not really research. We have data scientists / academics who develop the AI models for our offering and are constantly devising new techniques in artificial intelligence to make sure that we're on the cutting edge, right? So they make sure that we're using the latest literature, that we're using the latest techniques, that we're inventing the latest techniques. Yeah. So we do have an academic team, you might say, within them. Yeah.
So they would be more. That's where my question was going. So they're primarily utilized to help drive your innovation, look at new ways of approaching, and then bring it to the team to figure out how to incorporate it?
Correct, right? So our chief scientist, Professor Alexander Wong, is Canada's research chair in artificial intelligence and a professor at the university. So his job on the academic side, and as an academic, is to make sure that he's always on top of the latest literature, reading about it, and contributing to it. And so the benefits of that contribution, indirectly benefit Darwin because we're always on the cutting edge thanks to him and the team under him.
How do you help your clients when they say, hey, this is great, we want to do this. This is probably something brand new to them, bringing in this new technology. How do you help them? How do you make it easier for them to adopt the technology? What does your process look like?
Yeah. Again, normally you're not speaking artificial intelligence to them, right? You're saying, okay, here's the problem we solve in the manufacturing workflow for this product. Mm-hmm. Do you have this problem, right? Or what are your problems, right? So understanding the pain points they have and whether or not those pain points map to what we can solve, that's the first part of it. Once you've identified it, then they'll start to ask, okay, how does it work? And that's when, having that manufacturing background I talked about, being able to speak their language. Well, what we do is we come to the plant, we install it, there's safety regs, we get that. We would do a burn test. So really just being familiar with their process and, being able to have a playbook almost whereby we say, this is the way we integrate and so forth, really is the thing that helps them. And then there might be some questions about, how does the artificial intelligence work? I'm curious. Sure, then you can get into that. But always lead with the business case and is there a pain point they have that is important to them that you can solve?
Let's shift a little bit now. Let's talk about future. Quantum computing is a hot topic where people I know are chasing as well. Now you put AI on top of that. How do you see those coming together? How close have you explored anything in the quantum computing area, and how do you see AI working with it?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not as an expert in quantum as I am in AI. I think quantum computing is still at least a decade out from what I can tell. And what people need to realize is that quantum computing can be orders of magnitude faster than classical computing, but for certain mathematical computer science type problems, not for everything, right? Now, some of those problems directly relate to the operations we do in artificial intelligence, such as like big matrix multiplication and things like that. There's even something called quantum machine learning, which is machine learning for quantum computers. So it's interesting. I think it's probably a decade, from what we can tell, from real implementation. So I think it is a research area that's important for our industry and the world in general. I think the big implication will be on security systems more than anything, right? Because most of our security today is based on some of those math problems I described that a classical computer would take years, if not tens or thousands of years to break, and a quantum computer could do it in minutes. Yeah. So there are big research initiatives to make, let's say, security systems that can withstand quantum attack. But I think it's a bit too far out for us to really start thinking about it in a real way. Although we're curious about it, it's not something that we think is imminent in the next 3 to 5 years, let's say.
So now coming back to today and where we are with artificial intelligence, and I guess going back to privacy concerns where the data is, and I think even on ChatGPT, I think it was Samsung who had the employees that were putting code in there, and it was made available. I can't remember the exact story, but in that case, how do you see enterprise protect themselves? Like, this is a great technology. You need the data sets. How do you give a private system in a way where they could explore safely?
Yeah, so there are companies that are trying to fill that gap that ChatGPT has right now. There's a company here in Canada called Cohere that is trying to do this for natural language for organizations. There's a number of others in the United States and the UK. So there are efforts to try to give people private versions of this so they don't, have the concerns that Samsung certainly experienced. Also, what companies are doing, like our own, we're using ChatGPT for software development, but we are trying to develop best practices around how you use it, when you use it, and what you share with it. So it's one thing to say to ChatGPT, give me an algorithm for sorting numbers and doing this, right? And you're just asking it to do that, and away you go. It's another thing to say, here's my proprietary code, clean it up, right? Which is what, to put it crudely, some Samsung employees were doing, and now Microsoft had that code because they shared it with ChatGPT. So there's going to be a lot of education around this and the implementation of best practices to use this effectively, and then private alternatives like Cohere and others.
No, I governance, education, training are all needed. I've seen that the mistake back when social media was coming.
Sure.
The schools were like, no, don't. It's don't even talk about it. Abandoned. Then you had a whole generation of kids that kind of had to figure it out themselves without proper guidance. So
exactly,
we're repeating ourselves, over and over. Hopefully, we'll learn our lessons. So that we can get ahead of it faster. How does Darwin approach the issue with explainability in its AI technology?
Yeah, so for context, right? Explainability is you have this AI that can do all this remarkable stuff. You don't know how it does it or how it reaches those conclusions, right? Okay. So this was the early problem with machine learning in 2018, and we developed proprietary IP to crack that problem, to give people insight into why it was doing what it's doing. We in our product, that manifests itself when, in a manufacturing context, when we identify something, let's say, as a defect, our software is capable of telling the user, this is why I considered this a defect. Here are some analogous cases for other defects. Do you agree with this? And that reasoning is still very important because humans are still very good at many things. And so, that ability is quite useful to, get people, the comfort level to give AI this feedback and to make the AI better over time.
I think during the pandemic, you were posting about this, and this might have been one of the initiatives that you guys were helping on, was with the COVID, I forget the COVID.net or something, where you were helping doctors identify COVID faster. When they originally was given to them, they rejected it because they didn't trust it. But once you gave the explainability part and showed them, or kind of gave them areas, they embraced it a lot more.
Yeah, that's true. So again, for context there, rewind back. I know it's mentally hard for a lot of us because we're well past the pandemic. But rewind to March of 2020, and when the pandemic happened, within a week of the Ontario government shutting down the province, my team developed a neural network called COVIDnet that diagnosed corona based on chest X-rays and CT scans. And this was around the time we were just, I say we, I mean the medical community was just trying to understand what COVID was and how it manifested in the respiratory system differently than, let's say, pneumonia. So we were able to classify COVID patients, positive patients from negative patients with pretty impressive accuracy. But you're right, Pat. It wasn't until we could highlight for folks, okay, this is the part of the lung where I'm finding COVID, so to speak, that gave them enough context to start using this as a tool and gave them insight into, things that were markers of COVID, things that weren't, and to start using it as a part of their clinical process. And so, explainability was quite key for us.
Has there been anything outside of COVID where something like this has been going on with doctors at all, with any other illnesses?
Oh yeah. I mean, our chief scientist has done it for cancer screening. What was the latest one? I think they've used it now to determine types of chemotherapy that would be most effective for cancer patients. The medical community, and not just us, I mean, many, we're not even in healthcare, we're in manufacturing. There's a lot of innovative work that is being done in the medical field. The challenge is there's so much regulation, rightly so, around medical work. You have to be very careful about the types of problems you choose, the economics of solving that problem, etc., etc.
So how do you approach your collaboration and partnerships with other companies in the AI manufacturing space?
Yeah, good question. It's easy to be seduced when you're a startup or a smaller company like ours with big names, right? To say you're partnering with IBM, you're partnering with NVIDIA. And I think one of the big lessons we take away from that is they are huge companies that will try to be supportive, but they've got their own agenda and their own, goals and their own concerns. So now that we have a very focused mission, we honestly have to be very disciplined about it and say, look, is there value at working with Microsoft right now, given what we do, right? Recently, for example, we ported a lot of our systems from Linux to Windows because that's what enterprises kind of require. So, that got Microsoft's attention. Hey, what are you guys doing with Windows? And so that was beneficial, right, to actually have some Microsoft support there. So we do it in a way that, in two ways. A, can they support us with our offering or what have you? And B, can they be an extra sales channel for us if we are selling their technology, right? So many of these companies, if you have a significant part of their technology in your stack, if you're using AWS or Azure or NVIDIA GPUs, depending on the composition of your solution, they can then go and sell it to their people. But you have to be careful about that because they have to be incentivized in the right way. It has to make sense for them. So we try to take a very disciplined approach, Pat, I would say, to partners.
So piggyback on that one, we kind of addressed it a little bit, but how do you address concerns around the use of data, making sure it's relevant, irrelevant, or even discriminatory data? Because I I listened to you on another episode or read somewhere. I love the term of nonsensical correlations, and you were talking about autonomous vehicles. How I was learning I think it was the one story about the car that turned left.
Purple sky.
Purple sky. So how do you guys navigate that, knowing that those things still exist and it's still possible?
Yeah, that's where our explainability, our unique technology is really valuable. Because during the development phase, our data scientists and academics can use that technology to figure out, okay, are you classifying this for a reason that makes no sense? Or are you classifying this for a reason that kind of aligns with our human understanding of things? Right? And when it doesn't, when a machine is doing something effectively, but you have no idea why that's working, one of two things. Either it's doing it in a nonsensical way, as you say, which is going to bite you because it has a limited view of the world, and that's more often than not the case, is that it's modeling the data set and not the real world, and there's problems with your data. Or, here's the interesting thing, sometimes it has an insight about the subject matter that even the human expert does not, right? And that can be fascinating. So the example I give in the medical context is, our chief scientist had a program. It wasn't Darwin. It was with the University of Waterloo, where they were trying to detect, if I remember correctly, lung cancer. And they looked at what is the AI looking at, what is the doctor looking at, and there was mostly alignment for all the CT scans, I think it was in this case. But in some cases, the AI would look at the walls of the lungs and not the lung itself, and that would tell it something about cancer. So at first, the human experts, the doctors, were like, okay, this doesn't make any sense. But then they learned that something about the lungs, the walls of the lungs of an individual, can actually tell you something about cancer. So the AI gave them insight into their own purported area of expertise they didn't have before. Right? So it can be both, and that's the fascinating thing about artificial intelligence. And the scary thing, sometimes it'll outdo us and find things that we never would have thought of. Yeah.
Tell me more about your journey as a leader, as a person. You've always been on the cusp of innovation and technology. So it's more about how did your leadership style change? How do you adapt? I know you talked about that empathetic leadership, but how has that journey been for you? Like, has it been like certain situations you found yourself in that changed it, or is it just through experiences, interactions? How have you evolved?
Yeah, good question. What a great question. I mean, if I compare the leader I was maybe 4 years ago with the leader now, you got to think of what all companies, including our company, has gone through in the last 5 years, right? A pandemic, a war in Europe, the tech community or the tech sector not blowing up, but really experiencing difficulty, having to reduce staff, having to raise money under difficult circumstances. Like, we've been through, use an analogy like a War of the Families in The Godfather, right? That happens every 5 or 10 years, right? We've earned our bones in Godfather speak. So I think, Pat, like, the takeaway for me and the way I think it's changed is you can't I think Andy Roddick, the famous tennis player, said this, and it stuck with me for a long time. Like, you can't get too down when things are bad, and likewise, you can't get too euphoric or self-congratulatory when things are great. You just need to ride it out sometimes. And it's just to recognize that thing that other entrepreneurs tell you about persistence and just sticking with it and, knowing the next day will be better, like, that grows you up in a real way when you got to go through tough times. And a lot of us went through a tough time last year in tech, right? We thought we were coming out of it. Oh, great, the pandemic's ending. We can travel again, blah, 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 blah. And then, Jesus, the world turned upside down on us. So I think I'm a more hardened leader, right, in a good way. Like, things don't faze me as much, right? An unhappy customer, technology setback, this happens. How you respond with calmness, confidence, a plan of action, those are important things. So I think, just the level-headedness I try to bring to our business, I think has probably improved a great deal.
So one of my all-time favorite books is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Habit number 7, sharpen the saw. How do you take care of yourself? What do you do to keep yourself at the forefront?
Yeah. Number one, I think all people, but certainly all leaders, need to think actively about their mental health. And I think it's a credit to our society that this is now a conversation that we can have honestly, right? It's not something my parents' generation would have talked about. So, many leaders have executive coaches, which are basically therapists, which is what I have. Because when you run an organization, there's very few people you will get empathy from because you're the boss, right? So who do you complain to? Who do you bitch to when a day is shitty and you want to vent or whatever? So that's important. Different people have different coping mechanisms. For me, exercise is very important. My wife and I got a Peloton, like many families during the pandemic. That's a big hobby. And I find that really is effective. Like if I'm having a particularly hard day, 45 minutes on the bike, which will disconnect me from that world and perspiration, that's really important. So I think those are the two big ones. I try to make time for reading and more contemplative things. It's really hard sometimes given how busy things are in the day-to-day. But I try to carve out Friday, 2 p.m. onwards when the week is kind of winding down for reading the big ChatGPT article or what have you in the MIT Tech Review. So those are, nourish your body, nourish your mind, nourish your soul, and, stay sharp. I think that's really good advice.
So how do you, when you talk about an executive coach and you talk about, not to complain about, but how do you determine what you bring in front of your team versus stuff that you need to, other than vent? How do you walk that line?
Yeah. I think it's an art, not a science, right? You want to give the team transparency. If you have a good enough team, which I have, you want to be transparent with them. Guys, I don't know what the right answer is, right? And I think a leader should be vulnerable when it's called for. However, your job is also to eliminate distraction so they can focus. So, last year, for example, fundraising in the climate last year was exceptionally difficult and stressful. To a large extent, I shielded my team from, I think, that anxiety. Because it's not something that they could have really helped with. And it's not something they needed to worry about. The best way they could help me with fundraising was pushing the business forward. So, you need to ask yourself as a leader, are you sharing things for the sake of sharing them? And sometimes that's important, but are you giving people information so they can help you move the business forward, right? And knowing that line is not always straightforward. When there's a crisis that happens, can they help you solve it? In which case, of course, share it with them. But if they can't, and they can't do anything, and it's going to distract them or have a negative impact on their ability to do what they got to do, why do you share it with them? So it's not about being, dishonest. It's just about discriminating what you choose and when you choose so that your team is functioning at their maximum capabilities.
No, I love the example you give, the choice between distracting them versus, leaning on your core team to, reinforce what that relationship is, the way you guys work together. So very powerful, very...
Do you remember the movie Apollo 13? It came out in our last year of high school, right? So Ed Harris plays the mission director. And right at the end of the movie, they're about to re-enter the Earth. And one of his lieutenants goes, hey, they're still shallowing up there a bit, right? Do you want to tell them? And he goes, is there anything they can do about it? And he goes, no. And he goes, well, they don't need to know then, do they? Because he's made the decision, why are we going to give them negative information if they can't do anything about it? No, right? So it's that kind of thing,
That movie, I love that movie because it was also used in one of the courses I've taken when they were trying to talk about driving innovation, and they used that movie as a case study when they, a lot of people like to say think outside the box, but the reality is you drive innovation from what's inside the box. So in that movie, when they talk about what do they have on that ship that's going to drive them to figure out what they need to do, I thought that was a very powerful scene. It's a great movie. Teaching about that lesson there. What else? So tell me a typical day that you go through. Like, what does your typical morning look like? Are you a coffee person, tea person? Do you skip breakfast?
No. I get up early. I've always been a morning person. Well, I haven't always been, but in my later adulthood, I was. I get up between 4:30 and 6, depending on the day. So I get up pretty early. I have a 4-year-old who gets up between 6:30 and 7. So I have about an hour and a half of quiet time in the morning. I usually do an energy drink. That's my equivalent of my coffee. I read a bit of news. Horrible Toronto sports news recently, as you probably know. I answer emails in the quiet time. I think that's the best time to really get email time down. And the day really starts for me when my son gets up. So there's about an hour and a half together, getting ready for school. And then it depends on the day. Sometimes I work in our Toronto office. And then, from about 9 to 4, it's a whirlwind, right? Meetings, team meetings, customer developments, investor meetings. You never know what a day is going to look like. And that, of course, is what makes startup life so invigorating, right? And then I wind down around 5-ish, like most people, pick my son up, have dinner, and then, kind of toil away after that. So, yeah, it's pretty... On the outside, it's pretty standard. And the inside, it's like every day is a roller coaster at a company like ours, and that's why we do it. I think.
Awesome. Is there anything that you can share that's upcoming with Darwin that you want to promote, or?
I mean, the big thing obviously is generative AI. So I had a Forbes piece that came out, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, on how we're using generative AI in manufacturing. It's something we're going to be talking about increasingly, especially as we innovate around that area. So one of the big questions I can share is, how do you trust the output of generative AI? And that is something that we historically have done a good job kind of innovating around. So there's coming news from our side around that topic, I would say, that people should look out for.
Any entrepreneur in the tech space, what kind of advice would you give them today to navigate these uncharted waters?
Embrace the journey is the big one. Like, if you look at people who are not just entrepreneurs, you look at people who are exceptional at what they do, the great ones stand out from the good ones because of their commitment to the process, right? I was always a LeBron James hater a little bit. I don't think I'll ever be as good as Michael Jordan, but that's the older person in me speaking. But you look at his longevity and like how he's been able to maintain that level of fitness and elite performance for as long as he had, it really is quite impressive and remarkable. And what I only appreciated about him recently, having read a few articles on him, is like his love and commitment for conditioning, the mental sharpness, the reviewing of tapes. When you look at the great players, Federer, Nadal, yes, Djokovic, and on the tennis side, it's not just that they're incredible players, it's that they've maximized their talent because of their commitment to process. Yeah. And so for entrepreneurs, it's like there's highs and lows. You're going to see somebody raise $100 million the day after you start your company. You need to commit to a long process of building something from the ground up. And that's a process. And so you have to enjoy and embrace that process in order to be successful. And so I would, encourage people to think about that.
I love how I love that analogy, because that really, in my eyes, ties everything together. When you talk about like emerging technologies, he was at the forefront. Like, he invested his time and money into what the latest science was, and he applied it in his day-to-day life, which he's benefited from. So it's not that the technology, it was his ability to adapt the technology, incorporate into his day-to-day life, which made him strong. Yeah. He's obviously a gifted athlete, but 20 years in the league at being an impact player is
and reinventing yourself, right? Like, he doesn't have the spring in his step that he did when he was 18. How could he? You look at another great player, Lionel Messi, who completed football by winning the World Cup. He's changed his game. He had to. He's not 30. He's not 25 anymore. He's 35. So what struck me during the World Cup was he would pick his moments in a game and when he accelerated and when he pulled back and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's fascinating, and I guess most great players know how and when they can contribute and like you said, change and adapt their role because it makes the impact. So those are good examples. So Sheldon, I can't thank you enough for your time today. I love the conversation. Excited about the future of where things are going. I've always looked at you as someone who's been very generous with their time, someone who's does a great job in explaining and demystifying the technology. I remember from a few years back when you came to speak at the company I was working at the time. It was just great how you, I guess the example you gave when you talked about with your clients, you talk into their world and language they understand. So you've been a great ambassador to technology, AI, things like that. So thank you very much for joining. And I wish you continued success, and I would love to keep in touch and maybe bring you on for a future episode.
Definitely. Thanks for having me, Pat. People can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and I appreciate the conversation, and hope we'll do this again.
And that wraps up the first episode of Articulate This. A special thanks to Sheldon for joining me today. If you like this episode, you can show your support by liking or subscribing to the channel. By doing so, you'll be the first to know when a new episode is released. Please share this with a friend, a coworker, colleague, or anyone else who you think could benefit from these insights we shared today. It goes a long way in helping grow this channel and this community of passionate learners. Once again, thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to the next episode. Until next time.